So I'm going to start by hopefully sharing my screen successfully. Let's see here. Share. All right. So hopefully you can see my screen here at this point.
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Joey. And yeah, so we're going to talk about obviously some more wildlife tracking today, focusing in on the weasel family. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to see the first presentation, which really got into detail about tracking in general and some of the things to look out for as far as trail patterns and just what to kind of be on the lookout for when you're tracking. Encourage you to check those out if you haven't seen them yet. We'll definitely get into some of that detail today as well too, but not as much fine detail just because we're going to be focusing exclusively on weasels today. And those of you who've been to the other presentations know as well that one of the reasons I really like tracking is because of the opportunity to be able to become kind of a detective out there in the woods or in your backyard or in downtown of a big city or wherever. I mean, animals are everywhere. They leave their signs everywhere. They're able to see what they've been doing and try to figure out, put together the pieces of the puzzle that they've left behind and try to figure out who was there, why they were there. Answer all sorts of kinds of questions. And this goes very much in line with being kind of a detective in the kind of the crime fighting world as well too. And many of you are familiar with the TV show CSI, and that's why I call tracking TSI, of course, track and sign investigation. So, and this is of course quarantine edition still, because we're all hopefully at the very tail end of quarantine here, but we're still there, and still there with our Northwoods animals in the background making their calls and sounds for us. So, yeah, TSI, it's really a great way to learn more about the animals that we're sharing our national parks and our neighborhoods with. And this is kind of the what I like to call the usual suspects of the animals that you're most likely to come across when you're tracking in the woods in the Northeast anyway. It's not a complete list, and some of them you're much more likely to see than others, but they're all a possibility. Some extremely common, like the gray squirrels, and some there's only been literally you can count on one hand how many have been seen over the past decade or so, at least officially. With like the mountain lions, things like that. So they kind of span the gamut there. And today we're going to focus on the weasels, and you can see there's a lot of animals here. So sometimes it can be a little overwhelming to try to figure out, where to start. And the great thing about, kind of focusing in on a different family is that they all share similar characteristics, just like we do with our own families. Our aunts, uncles, and nieces and nephews and grandparents and great grandparents. There's things that we have that they had. There's personality traits that we share. Same with the wild animal world. The mustelids, the weasels, from a fisher to a striped skunk. They share similar ways they like to move. They share similar body layout usually. Obviously the dogs, the canids family, the foxes, the cat family. Once you kind of start to learn what to look for and recognize as far as what different families of animals share, it becomes a lot less intimidating and a lot more, it kind of gives you a great place to start as far as trying to figure out what you're looking at exactly. So today we'll focus in on the weasel family and see, hopefully give you a better idea of what to look for and what you're seeing out there. We'll start with the fisher. Some of you who are on the first one, you have seen this already, so it might be a bit of a review, but still a good idea to review these things, and especially because the fisher is such a fun animal to track. They are, one of the more kind of successful weasels in the Northeast in the past decade or so, especially. They seem to be, doing pretty well. Their numbers are coming back. When the forests of the Northeast were mostly removed, the past couple centuries, most of the fishers were gone too. They were kind of what's known as extirpated, locally extinct for the most part. Very few of them left in the area, but Now, every time I go tracking in my backyard, I, almost always come across signs of a fisher. There's in the national park in Woodstock, there's a healthy fisher population there. The national forests, they're starting to become more comfortable with people in general, and they've been seen in fairly large cities as well too. I think they've even been found in New York City on occasion. So they're adapting to being around people a little bit more than they used to be, kind of being more known as a shy animal around people, but now they're starting to be seen more and more. One of the larger weasels that we have here, we'll talk about the largest one later. The otter is in the weasel family, and they tend to be a little bit larger. But a male fisher can still be pretty big, 13 pounds, and there's some that are very rarely more than that. But that's would be a large male fisher. Female is about half the size of the male fisher. And they're both very capable at tracking down prey when they want. Everything from birds, turkeys, large birds, small birds, everything from porcupines to squirrels is a major staple of their diet as well too. So they have a wide variety of things that they can go after because of their skill and dexterity in trees, their powerful jaws, especially for the male. And their sharp claws and speed overall. They're very capable of finding food when they need to. This is two fishers who are part of a study. They're sleeping. They're not passed on. But you can see the quite big size difference between males and females here. The male obviously being the one on the right, and the one on the left is a female fisher. And when possible, tracking again, and I've said this before in some other programs, you can really get into fine detail and really kind of, tracking can encompass all parts of, thinking about how animals are built and the way they move, and that all helps you kind of understand the story of often kind of what you're seeing on the ground, and that can be helpful to even study their skeletal structure sometimes, if you want to get into that. And here we have a female fisher skull on the top, and the male skull fisher on the skull on the bottom. And you can see there's quite a bit of difference already just looking at it here. The female skull seems to be a lot sleeker. There's kind of a lot narrower on the top there. The male's got this strong brow ridge and this very apparent what's called the sagittal crest on top of the skull here, which the female lacks. And this is kind of tells to the differences of these animals with kind of some of the prey that they might go after. A female with that smaller, sleeker skull can maybe chase after squirrels underground, some of the smaller, some of the holes that they might be trying to go under, woodchucks and things like that. Maybe the male with a stronger, bigger skull might not be able to fit as easily in some of those spaces, but this crest is very telling because this is where jaw muscles attached to. They kind of start at the top and wrap around the bottom of the jaw there. All animals that have a strong bite will have this sagittal crest here. So things like black bears and grizzly bears and wolves and coyotes all share this sagittal crest that the male fisher has as well too, and they all have very powerful jaws. So maybe the male might be more likely to go after things like woodchucks and larger woodchucks, and also porcupines and things that maybe the female fisher would be a little more, hesitant to go after just because of the way they're built there. Here we do see kind of it's a mock-up. It's not a real photo. It's a diorama of a fisher and a porcupine. It's interesting. I've been talking to some other trackers recently, and it's kind of a well-known kind of theme in the tracking world that fishers can go after porcupines. But talking with some people who've been tracking for, I've been tracking for 20 plus years, friends that have been doing it longer, and all of us can only count on our hands, once or twice that we've seen signs of fisher going after porcupine. We know that it happens, but it's probably not nearly as common as, sometimes you might read about in tracking books and things like that, just anecdotally, talking to folks. Haven't seen it much in the Northeast anyway, which is interesting. Can't really blame them. Porcupines obviously can be a challenge to hunt, but desperate times and desperate measures, I think, is the kind of thing. If food availability is really low and there happen to be a lot of porcupines in the area, I'm sure you'd see more predation on porcupines, but in general, fishers are so talented at catching squirrels and other things like that, they'd rather not have to face a porcupine if they didn't have to. So, probably not gonna see that very often. Looking at their tracks and the way their feet are built, of course, the internet is great for all sorts of things, and you can Google a Google image search for feet of all sorts of animals. I think these are mostly ones I got off of Google image searches. Looking at the way fisher feet are built, because obviously, looking at the way their feet look, you can tell what their tracks are going to look like on the ground. The picture we're seeing here obviously is kind of the ideal conditions for tracking, just kind of a dusting of snow that's kind of wet, so it makes these really nice crisp tracks that you have here. Of course, any of you who've been tracking before know that you very rarely get these perfect conditions, but it's still good to kind of see these and to look at them and learn from them, because that way, once you've kind of got this image in your mind of this perfect track, if you come across one that's not so perfect and maybe is missing some of the, the fine details, you can still kind of fill in those details in your mind because you've seen what the perfect track looks like. So you can kind of know, what one that's not as perfect would look like. But under ideal conditions, you do see all the claws. Usually you'll see all the claws on all 5 toes. Even here, it's a very faint toe. You see it from the hind foot. H is hind, F is front. Larger front foot for the fisher as well too, that you can see pretty clearly here as well. So those are all the weasels, the entire weasel family that we're going to talk to, all have 5 toes. Usually under all good conditions, all 5 toes show, both the front and the hind feet, and the claws often show in tracks. You'll see these things pop up when we're talking about the animals, and these are my #1 rule that if you guys were in the other sessions know is never say never and never say always when you're tracking, because again, often you're not going to get perfect conditions. So that's why this is often close showing tracks, because there are instances where the claws might not show in the tracks. So just got to keep an open mind about what you're seeing out there and try to fill in those pieces of the puzzle that maybe aren't there when you're looking for them. And then looking here at the kind of the way that tracks are, the track patterns that these animals put down might be a little bit more helpful even than kind of trying to study individual tracks, because again, without the perfect conditions, it can be challenging. But then when you start to see these kind of telltale signs of the trail patterns that they put down, that can often be a little bit more helpful in figuring out what you're actually seeing when you're out there in the woods trying to figure out what animal it is. And this is a very, very common weasel pattern here. This is called the 2x2 lope. Terms like lope and gallop and kind of hop and bound and all those kinds of things, don't really worry too much about them. They just describe the different ways that the animals are moving, whether it be from a walk to a full-on gallop. Usually a lope is kind of something in between that. And this, what we're seeing here, happens. You can tell the snow here is isn't super deep, but it's a little deeper. The track kind of sinking into the snow quite a bit here. And this is all about energy conservation, these kinds of things, when you see tracks like this and the weasel family especially, because what you're seeing here, it's not obvious looking at it, but each hole in the snow here is actually a front and a hind foot together. What I mean is the front foot came down here, and as the animal pushed off and was kind of leaping towards this next area here, the hind foot landed in the exact same hole that the front foot just made. And as you all know, we're just kind of getting over a winter here, so got plenty of snow. But walking out in the woods in the snow, if you're walking with somebody else and they're in front of you and they're making holes in the snow with their snowshoes or their feet, very often you're going to step in those exact same holes, because it's a lot easier when somebody's breaking ground for you than to make your own, break your own ground. So same thing if you had 4 legs, obviously, why let that perfectly good hole go to waste they just made with their front foot when you can use it for your back foot as well too. And so that's why often you'll see this when the snow conditions start to get a little deeper than they would have been otherwise, which is a little less, in this other photos here. These are the snow is obviously just a kind of a dusting you can see on these, and this might be a little bit more natural of a pattern for they use other times of year as well too, not just in the winter, which is called the 3x4 lope. The other one, 2x2, pretty obvious why it's called that. You see groups of two. Same kind of description for the 3x4 lope here, because there's spots where you see 4 tracks, which are all 4 feet. And sometimes it kind of, the middle 2 tracks kind of mush together here, and it looks maybe just like 1 track. So sometimes it looks like just 3, which you can see here as well too. Sometimes they kind of overlap. And this is the general rule of thumb of all animals with 4 legs, really, that we see around here. Anyway, kind of the faster an animal moves, the farther the hind feet are going to land in front of the front feet. So what I mean by that, what you're seeing here is actually, this is a front foot, this is a front foot, this is a hind foot, this is a hind foot. So actually the track that's farthest ahead is actually a hind foot, a rear foot, which is not the way our brain likes to see this. We'd like to think that that's the front foot, just because that's the way, obviously, the way animals' bodies are built. But it makes sense when you think, as the animal's pushing itself off with greater momentum from its front feet, its hind quarters kind of fly through the air farther. The farther they go through the air, the faster the animals are going, the farther that their hind quarters are going to fly before they land down. So in a full-on gallop, like with dogs and cats, the hind feet are quite a bit in front of where the front feet land. With fishers, they generally don't go as fast as cats and dogs can go. So generally you see more of this kind of 3x4 pattern here. And we're going to hopefully be able to see this somewhat more clearly in action here with this this video here. This is showing a fisher. This is quite a few years ago this video was taken, so the quality is not great, but you still get the idea of a fisher moving there. Obviously in real speed, it's a little difficult to see what's going on there, but we can kind of back up the footage here and pause it for a second and kind of go forward frame by frame a little bit, and you'll see what's happening. Let me back it up again there a little bit. Sorry about that. This is the fisher coming along here, and you can see very clearly its front 2 feet are down and its rear end is up in the air. So it just kind of came around this corner here. So it can't go on full speed, right when it comes around the corner there. It kind of has to gain speed. So as it gains speed, hopefully we'll be able to see that its hind feet are starting to land further and further ahead of where they would have been the slower it goes. So this first time, it looks like the hind feet are going to land almost as like that 2x2 pattern. The hind feet are going to land just about where the front 2 feet were. If you can see there, that hind foot is landing just about where that front foot left. But the animal's going to start to gain speed as it's moving here. So the front 2 feet are down again, and here comes the hind foot landing in front of where that front foot just saw, as you can see there, hopefully. So the front 2 feet are down, rear end in the air, it pushes off, and the rear feet, start to land ahead. Pretty clear on that one too, that the hind feet are landing in front of where the front feet just were by a little bit. That's why you get that 3-4 pattern there, because sometimes, one of them lands kind of very close to where that front foot just was. But and the reason I really love videos like this too is because next time you come across kind of that scene in the woods, like we did with like you see this here, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of picture that in your mind now. You'll be able to see that fisher, running down, loping down the slug and going through the middle of the woods there, kind of in the theater of your mind, because you've seen it on videos that you can find on YouTube or anywhere else on the internet. And that's great, because that really kind of makes these tracks come more alive than they might have been otherwise. Just otherwise kind of look like just holes in the snow, but that really helps you kind of picture it a little bit better. So that is really the way the fisher moves and kind of what it looks like and what it does. We'll come across to its much smaller cousins here. Here in Vermont in the Northeast, the primary ones that we have are long-tailed weasels and short-tailed weasels, also known as ermine. And there's also the least weasel. I don't have those in Vermont. You might find them more in parts of Massachusetts and Connecticut, and they're even smaller, believe it or not. than the ermine or the short-tailed weasel, which is already pretty small. You can see, you know, a small female is just over 1.5 ounces, which always blows my mind. Thinking about how petite, you know, these animals can actually be. Even, you know, the long-tailed weasel, you know, a monster-sized long-tailed weasel is 9 ounces. You know, most of them are a little bit smaller than that, but they're long. You know, this includes the tail, and you know, thankfully, they are named aptly. You know, the length of a long-tailed weasel's tail is just about the length of its body, whereas with the short-tailed weasel, it's about half the length of the body. So if you get a good look at the tail and you're not sure what species it is, that can always clear it up for you. Both do turn white in winter. That's kind of, you know, ermine is kind of what traditionally they've been called in their white phase, which is why, you know, you may have heard them called ermine. In Europe, they're often called stoats, S-T-O-A-T. Here in North America, usually called either the, you know, the short-tailed weasel or the ermine, and then the long-tailed weasel. But they, you know, they both are very capable hunters. This is a long-tailed weasel that, you know, even though it only weighs, you know, about as much as a little less than a Coke can, goes after much larger prey, you know, things like rabbits, or something that they're, you know, not shy to go after. This one's doing all it can. This, somebody photographed this. It was trying to pull it just under the front porch of this person's house, so it could, you know, kind of come back to it later. But it took all its effort just to drag this, you know, large rabbit relative to the size of the weasel under there. And this is a short-tailed weasel that had just caught a mouse. So even a mouse is a pretty good size meal for this animal. And I love this photo for a lot of reasons, but you can also, as we'll see in the tracks in a minute, you can kind of see what's happening here. I mean, these are its front 2 feet that come down. So they come down one after the other. Now here's one that's down and one that just is about to, you know, land right in front. And then these 2 hind feet, often but not always, they will be paired together. So they use them, you know, push off together at the same time. So they're starting to kind of come up and around, and you can see clearly that these hind feet are probably going to land somewhere near or in front of where the front feet are, because they're already launched, and then the way the animal's body kind of bends, they're already, you know, kind of in front of where the front feet are. So, you know, it gives you kind of a better visual of you know, the way these tracks are made. And they're pretty similar for both these species. You know, it can be hard, especially because they, you know, a large female short-tailed and a small, a large male short-tailed and a small female long-tailed can have, you know, pretty similar looking tracks. So it can be hard to kind of distinguish between those for sure. Sometimes, you know, you're not going to be able to exactly tell, but a lot of times you're just going to be happy to know that it's either a long-tailed or a short, or, you know, it's either a long-tailed or a short-tailed, maybe not which one it is, but you should be able to at least get it down to that. And here we can see kind of, you know, some of what I was talking about before anyway, with the 2, these are actually the 2 hind feet paired, and the 2 front feet here. So it wasn't a super fast, you know, speed that the animal's going at, because the front feet have not landed fully in front of where the front feet are, but you can still get the idea the way they're laid out. Very furry feet, very furry toe pads and heel pads and all that. So oftentimes they're kind of muted tracks. You know, they're not all that crisp. Compared to maybe some other animals that are out there, like the mink that we'll see, especially in winter and the snow conditions as well, that we can see here. This is an old tape measure I had where I kind of marked, if you can see here, there's an E because that's kind of this average size of an ermine tracks, which these are here. And then the long-tailed weasel, a large one, can be up in this range here, just over 2 inches or so wide. So, you know, kind of a good way to start to help you remember the size difference between the widths of the groups of tracks that you can have there. And it's always helpful as well, too, when, you know, animals are kind of moving in the same area. And I always find that helpful to kind of photograph these, because, you know, if you don't have other things to, you know, gauge what the size of it is, like often, you know, you put like your keys down or a penny or whatever you have in your pocket, so you can kind of get an idea of size. But it's also helpful if you have other animals that are through that area too, you can see here. So, you know, mink are about twice the size or so, a little bit more maybe even, of ermine. tracks that you can see, you know, out in the woods, and often kind of be in the same areas sometimes. So that's always a helpful thing. We'll see that several times throughout the presentation here. And as far as kind of behavior of the different species, ermine, short-tailed weasel, you know, they tend to have kind of these meandering paths that you can see here as this weasel moves its way through this open patch here, and, you know, in search of prey when they're kind of out there. Very few times it's a straight line, as opposed to maybe some other members of the weasel family that might move a little bit more. They're all kind of, you know, full of energy and always checking things out here and there. So they don't, you know, always move in straight lines, but that's especially true for the smaller weasels I found. And interestingly enough, the ermine tends to have, for the most part, over the course of its trails, you know, they tend to be, you know, kind of wavy like this. But when you compare it with the tracks of a long-tailed weasel, long-tailed weasel's Latin name is Mustela frenata, which I always found kind of helpful, because frenata kind of sounds like frenetic, you know, lots of energy all over the place, and a little hard to see in this photo here. But if you kind of follow the bouncing ball here, this is pretty typical of long-tailed weasel tracks, much more exaggerated meanders, you know, back and forth and zigzagging here and there, and always kind of looking for something to scare up and chase down, and, you know, dive underneath the snow, chase something under the snow. They have very thin, lean bodies, and very easily tunnel underneath the snow, you know, in chase of red squirrels or voles or mice or whatever under there. And weasels, especially short and long-tailed weasels, kind of get a reputation for killing, you know, just for the sake of killing. You know, sometimes the famous kind of, you know, example of that is like a, you know, a weasel in a hen house. And they seem to, you know, kill all the chickens and when they're in there, and that makes people think that maybe they're kind of just killing for fun, or they don't know, you know, they can't stop themselves. And I think more to the truth in that matter is that, you know, when you look at the body of a weasel, you know, as compared to like something like a, you know, a woodchuck or a beaver, or even like, you know, coyotes, weasels are so extremely thin, right? They carry very little body fat on themselves, and that's kind of part of their strategy of being able to chase things into their own dens and holes. And if they had kind of a wide body that destroyed a lot of body fat on, it might be a lot harder to have the speed to chase those things down, and also to kind of follow them into their own dens and holes and hiding spots. So they store their energy and their fat kind of exterior, you know, on the outside of their bodies, in the sense that when the killing is good, you know, they're gonna kill, you know, several, you know, more mice than they can probably eat in one sitting, and then they'll cache those mice around, C-A-C-H-E, cache them around in other spots, and go back and feed on them, you know, especially in the winter when they're going to last a little longer, and, you know, eat them when they need them, when they, you know, when they can. To them, when they go into that hen house and kill all those chickens, you know, they're planning on coming back, you know, if possible, to feed on those chickens again. They're not thinking that, you know, they wanted to kill them and eat them all at one time. That's future food for them. And sometimes, you know, maybe they can get a little out of hand and, you know, kill more than they would be able to eat, but it's not because of, you know, that they're having fun killing. It's because to them, this is they're setting up their meal plan, you know, kind of for the next several days or a week or so. So this is, you know, part of their strategy for survival. So that's the ermines and the long-tailed weasels. And moving on to our next species here is a mink. And mink, you know, they are kind of adaptable to both land and water, you know, very happy swimming through brooks and streams and rivers, and you know, kind of are built for it as well too. They're very, you know, kind of oily, waterproof exterior, partially webbed toes. They do really well in that environment. They don't turn white in winter. They stay this kind of chocolate brown all year round. They do have kind of a white patch here and there, like under their throats and things like that. But for the most part, you know, they stay kind of this, you know, anybody who's seen a real mink coat or a fake mink coat, you know, kind of know what that looks like, and that's their style there. very skilled at catching, small fish and crayfish and frogs are their primary diets for aquatic species. But I've seen them catch chipmunks and squirrels and birds as well too. So they have quite a varied diet as well too. But very adept at chasing things underwater and tunneling through the snow, as you can see here as well. Oh, just get back there so see their general size anyway. So they can be as much as almost 3.5 pounds, but again, mostly it's kind of in the middle range. Females, again, it'll be smaller than males for these species too. So somewhere between 1.5 to 2.5 pounds is probably pretty average for the species. They tend to not seem to have quite as furry feet as their smaller cousins, the long-tailed and short-tailed. It's hard to tell here, but they do have partially webbed feet as well. And you can see, sometimes that shows up in the tracks, especially the lack of furriness, in the right conditions. Very crisp toe pads and heel pads here, and also, still part of that front foot, 5 toes on each, and claws often showing. We're seeing that here as well. And just like we saw in that photo with the ermine, sometimes you can have the 2 front feet come down and the paired hind feet come down as well too, right in front of it. Sometimes we'll get this 3-4 pattern, like we had with the fisher. So again, the right front foot here, right hind, left front, left hind here. So it can kind of leave this diagonal looking pattern here, but again, the top track there is going to be the hind foot rather than the front foot, which takes some getting used to. And they can do that classic 2-by, especially, the snow is maybe slightly deeper than what we see here on the surface. So, they're starting to kind of want, over the course of a day of searching for food, bounding through the woods, it adds up every time you have to make a new hole in the snow and you're not sure where your next meal is coming from. Conservation of energy, extremely important. So, even in not so deep conditions, they might revert to this 2-by lope rather than the 3-by, 3-by-4 or 4-by-4 we see often with them. So something to keep in mind when you're, the tracking conditions that you're in are going to have a big impact on the kinds of tracks you're going to see. And this is just a look at, often when you're by a stream bank, that's often where I go to look for tracks for mink, because they're so active around streams and brooks. It's kind of one of their primary places to be looking for food. So always check out the mud around there and look for these kind of patterns of, either the bound or lopes and things like that. You're often going to find near there, which is always good to see. And here's a nice comparison of fisher and mink together. So we just saw mink and ermine. They're about twice the size or more of the ermine, and the fisher is about twice the size or quite a bit more than the mink is. So the fisher is. So kind of see the size differences between the families here as well too. This is kind of what I like to call a special case study here. In the sense that this is kind of special to mink that we're going to see, not too uncommonly if you follow their tracks around for long enough. This is not too far up into the woods behind my backyard here, a couple of different spots on this frozen brook. I was following them a few years back. And this is an exit. This is just like a natural kind of hole in the ice where there's like a rock or something that kind of kept the ice from freezing. But this is where the mink came out. And you can see it's clear tracks here, but obvious signs of something being, some kind of drag mark here that you're looking at. Same with this one here too, obvious drag mark. Here you might be fooled into thinking that that's like a tail drag because it seems to kind of be down behind the body. But on this one, unless its tail is really messed up, hopefully it doesn't have a tail that's, kind of that much sticking to the side of it over there. That would not be good for the animal. So it makes you think that something else is going on there. And again, thinking that mink are very good at catching things under the water, fairly good sized prey. They can dig up hibernating frogs even underwater. They can find, especially in the winter, they can find crayfish under there too. And because of the size of the prey, sometimes they'll be dragging them. When they first pull them out, they'll get dragged a little bit in the mud or snow or whatever. So this is a crayfish that this one caught in this photo which, you can clearly see it's kind of hanging at the side of its mouth. And I think that's what happened here. Probably caught a crayfish or something or similar to that and was dragging it. Maybe this one is a little bit smaller of a prey because it's not kind of, dragging off to the side of its mouth there, but it's something else that this one caught underneath the water, and then, took it off somewhere to either eat it immediately or cache it as well too. Mink will also cache their prey as well, which is always, really kind of neat thing to see when you're tracking mink in the woods, especially, on a frozen brook or something. Moving on to our next weasel, we have the river otter. Very fun animal to track for many reasons. It seems to be one of the more playful animals in the, just in general, not even just in the weasel family, but just in general. They seem to be having a good time out there, more so maybe than some other animals who seem to kind of be more business-like. When they're out going about and at their daily activities to try to find food. And it might be a reflection of otters are, just like a lot of other weasels, are very good at what they do. They're very good at catching food. Again, obviously otters are even more adapted to life in large bodies of water and larger streams and rivers as well too, and very good at catching fish primarily is their main meals that they catch too, but also crayfish and other things too that they'll certainly go after as well. But they seem to have enough time to have these social, they're very social amongst each other. And there's usually a lot of the other weasels are more solitary, but otters can be in family groups a little bit more. So sometimes you might see groups of their tracks rather than you might see for things like a fisher. This time of year is their mating season, March. So you might see actually 2 pairs of tracks for fisher together this time of year, but that's only for a few days to a couple weeks or so that you might see that. Most oftentimes they're solitary tracks to get apart from each other, as opposed to things like the river otter, which you might often see more together as a group of them. And they can be 30 pounds. That's a very large otter. Again, this is the extremes, 11 to 30, so it's usually more in the middle. But they can be a big animal out there, a big weasel for sure. And they tend to be a little more vocal than the other ones, the other weasels, at least like the fisher and the short and long-tailed and the mink. Otters, because I think they're kind of more social. Hopefully you can hear this. They have these communications between each other, either underwater or above the surface. Almost sounds like whales or something, right? Kind of these squeaks and dolphins or something, like, the way they communicate, because the way that sound travels underwater, maybe they have kind of a different way of communicating. That these are, most of the times they're kind of proximity calls, just letting them know that they're near each other, but I'm sure there's other things that they mean that we can't quite, figure out, translate what they mean yet. While we're on the subject of animals, making noises, I should have mentioned with the fisher, our first animal, it's kind of a legend. The fisher scream is one of those legends that's hard to, that kind of won't die, won't go down by itself. As far as scientists can tell, and they've studied them for many years and had them in captivity, and been out in the woods and everything, and observed them, that they're generally fairly silent. They do have growls, and then when they get upset, they can kind of hiss, especially if you corner one. But as far as that out and out blood curdling scream that they're kind of infamous for, that's 99% certainty that's not them, and it's probably more certainty than that, and that it's more likely a red fox. Red fox have an amazing repertoire of sound that can, they do scream and bark and yowl and make all sorts of different sounds, and it's almost always a red fox that's making that sound rather than the fisher that's being called for. So that's just something to keep in mind if you hear somebody mention the fisher scream. If you just do some searching online on YouTube, you'll see tons of videos about the fisher scream, but they never have the fisher in view. It's always just somebody pointing a camera in their backyard at night, and you can't see what's going on because it's actually a red fox that's doing that, not a fisher. But I digress. Looking at the feet of an otter, no surprise that they are well built for being in water. Extremely webbed feet, as opposed to especially their hind feet for the pushing off in the water and really being graceful. They almost look more awkward on land than they do in the water. They seem to kind of lumber across the land, whereas in the water they are almost like furry dolphins when they're under the water. They do seem very agile and adept when they're swimming, trying to either chase each other or after prey. Not very furry feet either, similar to what the mink is. I'm not sure if that's a function of spending so much time in water, but that is something that you'll see on otter feet. And their tracks, just like all the other weasel family, this is a little faint, but you can see this is that classic 3-4 pattern. So this is a front left foot, a front right foot, a rear left foot, and a rear right foot here. So this is the two front feet coming down and the hind feet landing kind of to the side and in front of what we see here. And sometimes they can kind of land together in a more in a group here. But this is another nice comparison of two animals moving, I'm sure, at different times through the woods here. But this is a gray fox track here. Gray fox, if you come across a 12-pound gray fox, you come across a very large gray fox. They're small, and this is probably a more average 20-something pound otter that you see here. So they're quite a bit larger than fox are, which to a lot of us, just thinking about it without analyzing it too much, we might off the top of our heads think that fox are larger than otter, but it's actually by quite a bit of a difference that the otters are larger than fox. Here we see, this is a very active frozen pond here in Vermont, where, over time you can see some very faint old otter tracks, going this way and that way and back and forth. They use this pond a lot, and here's obviously some very fresh tracks. And again, something else going on here. So this is another one where we kind of have to make sure we're paying close attention to the detail, what we're seeing, to kind of figure out what's going on. If this was something like a tail drag, which they do have obviously pretty thick, robust tails, maybe we could think to ourselves that might be a tail drag. But if that was the case, of course, their tracks would be somewhat obliterated by it, because the tail will be dragging over where their tracks just were. And here we can see, in these tracks, they're actually on top of this mark here. So it can't be from behind, it's got to be in front. So again, this is a dragging of most likely prey of some kind. This could be the body of a large fish or something. Not sure what this this otter caught here, but it was something pretty big, as you can tell by the size of the tail of the drag that we're seeing in the pond here. So they can catch fairly large meals for sure. And just another kind of good view and look at that 3-by-4 pattern there as well. Again, so front foot and the rear, and a rear foot is on the top. So just very similar to what we saw with the fisher as well. Otters move that way. And of course, they can do that 2-by-2 bound as well too here. So this is a 2-by-2 of the little bit deeper of snow conditions that this otter is going through. So very similar to all the other weasel family. But this is something that is not, you would not see often with other weasels in the weasel family. This is something very common to otters. And this is, any of you who've tracked or watched otters, even some of that video we saw, they love sliding. They love belly sliding through wherever they can, across frozen ice surface, down hills in the woods. This is maybe hard to tell in this photo, but this is a hill that kind of comes down, ends down here, or flattens out a little bit down here, and then continues on this way here. So this otter slid on its belly down here, kind of rolled around in the snow here for some time, and then slid on its way through the woods here. It's a very large, long otter slide through the forest here. And this is somewhat of a representation of what that might have looked like, where, if there's short sections, sometimes they'll just slide for a few feet here and there, and then keep on going and push off again and slide and push off and slide. In this particular one, they were able to slide for long stretches through this part of the woods here. So sometimes you'll see the long stretches there. And when they're doing that, they're tucking their feet in by their sides. And sometimes you can see the drag of their feet on the sides here. So this is their toes and claws kind of dragging alongside of them here. And then good snow conditions, you can see that pretty clearly. So that's a good sign. This is a wide-bodied animal. Fisher will slide occasionally. You don't see it that often. Mink more often, but mink would be much thinner of a width than this. You would never really confuse a mink slide with a otter slide just because of the size difference between the animals. It's, so obvious even to beginning trackers. Just a little bit of kind of study into that, and they'll be able to see that. And our last weasel, and one that's a lot of people may not associate with all the other ones. It seems like it's kind of an outlier by itself, is the striped skunk. It is part of the weasel family, but is highly adapted and highly kind of evolved in different aspects. All animals, they're called mustelids because they all have kind of a must to them that they use for marking territory and kind of communicating with interspecies between each other. But the skunk has taken it to a whole other level, as you all well know. They've developed that must into a very powerful defensive weapon when they need it, and they can use it very well to the glands that they have in their rear ends there. They can spray that many feet in the faces. It turns that there's actually 2 glands in their rear, and they shoot a stream out that meet in midair, kind of a foot or so at least behind the animal. When they meet, that the force of it turns it into a mist. It turns it into a spray, so it kind of becomes a misty spray that can get in the eyes and mouth of any of you have dogs that there's some dog species that seem not to have learned. Labs seem to be in that territory where they really want to go after skunks, and no matter how many times it gets sprayed in the face, they think maybe this time they'll get away with it. But they've you all have at least smelled the skunk, and hopefully you haven't smelled it on your own dog very often, but they'll often get a face full of skunk spray because they can't help their curiosity. Skunk can have 7 or more kits, offspring. They can have pretty large family groups come springtime. They also communicate through these proximity sounds. This is kind of a group of them talking to each other. So they're a little bit more vocal perhaps than the other the fishers and the short and long-tailed weasel, but they're not they don't make a lot of sound. Their feet are quite a bit different, a layout design than the other weasel families. Very bulbous, not almost hairless on the bottom part anyway. Long claws. These claws are for digging. Might have saw in this photo here. This is very typical skunk behavior. Digging up grubs, especially in our front lawns. I think I have photos coming up in a second. But so even though their feet are designed differently, they still have this classic kind of 3x4 in the right conditions trail pattern. So again, front foot here, front right, front left, rear right, rear left, and you can see these are perfect, great conditions here. So you see the very bulbous kind of pads you can kind of see in here, each individual toe you see in there, and the long claws landing in front as well. This one, you can see the toes in fully register, so the kind of the long claws are up ahead of the front foot here that you can see. So that shows in the tracks as well. And zooming in, this is just a really good, I guess, closer view of what we were just talking about there, seeing the claws and toes and heel pads. The rear foot just seems to be more kind of muffled for whatever reason, not quite as robust. And this 3-4 pattern that you see here. And when they're walking, they tend to be I guess this would be the opposite of pigeon-toed. I'm not sure if there's a term for that, but instead of pointing in, they kind of point away from each other. These are my tracks here. I'm checking them out along the side, but this has been used several times. Walked in and out of these holes that it made, many times. Instead of just one time, they keep on reusing these as they're going back and forth because their den was just up the hill from here, which we'll see in a second. And they can also, in other conditions when the snow is not as deep, that they can have an overstep. There's different kinds of, all animals with 4 feet, when they walk, they can either have what's called an overstep walk or an understep walk. What that means, that's just describing where does that hind foot land. Does it land in front of the front foot, or does it land to the back of the front foot? And if it lands in the back of it, it's a slower walk. If it lands in front of it, it's a faster walk, because it's still that rule of thumb: the faster an animal goes, the farther its hind feet land in front of its where it was going. So this is actually a little bit of a faster walk for the skunk that you see there. And this is to show, a lot of times people don't like seeing this in their lawns. They see these kind of small holes that are dug up in their lawns here, because skunks are well known for doing this. And what they're actually doing, though, is digging up grubs in your lawn. So it's probably actually a fairly healthy thing for your the skunks are doing you a favor by eating those grubs, because the grubs can kill off kind of large patches of grass. Whereas, when they kind of dig them up like this, you might make a small hole here, but overall you're going to have probably a healthier lawn. The skunks are helping you out by eating the grubs. So, maybe say a little thanks to the skunk next time you see this, because they're saving your lawn from the grubs when you're seeing that. And here we have this time of year, especially this was taken in March several years back. This is in the National Park in Woodstock as well. This skunk had taken over there was a woodchuck den here by the base of this tree. And skunks are known for either, taking over an abandoned den, or sometimes they'll kick the resident out that was there. If woodchuck doesn't want to mess with, a skunk, they'd rather not have to deal with getting sprayed in the face. So sometimes they will take over other animals that dug out a perfectly nice den for them, and they might enlarge it and, kind of make it more to their liking. This is why we're seeing a lot of kind of dirt all around here. So it seems like that skunk did a little bit more excavating, but it did take over a woodchuck den. And as it gets warmer, the skunks become more active. On warm, March days, that's when you might smell them a little bit more, because they're more likely to be active and more likely to get hit by a car. When they're kind of doing their nightly rounds, they're more active at night than they are during the day. And when it's warmer, they'll kind of, you can tell obviously it's warm enough for this to be kind of turned into mud. So that's why you're seeing them leaving these tracks here. They're not very active on, like today, for example, or last night, we got down into the low single digits to 0 around here. So I'm sure skunk is, with many other animals, were hunkering down. I'm sure they weren't very active last night, as opposed to last week where we had, those 40 and 50 and almost 60-degree days. And I'm sure they were quite active during that time. So they kind of, this time of year, it depends on what the weather is, depending on how active they get. But during those warm spells, skunk tend to be especially active. And that's, if you're driving around after a warm spell, it's amazing how often you will smell that skunks were active, just the night before, because, unfortunately, probably got hit by a car or something in the area. And that's it for the skunk. And I think not too bad on timing there. It's just before 1. So if Joey wants to help me, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm not sure if anything got put in the chat or not, but if you have any questions, or, want to ask me anything live too as well, that works. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great presentation. I enjoyed the videos of the otters. Those were a good touch.
Yeah, they're always fun.
Yeah. So we have 2 questions so far. The first one is, are the usual suspects links available online? I think that's in reference to your slide.
No, yeah, that's not, I mean, I'm happy to share at least, this a screenshot of kind of the usual suspects there with you all, but I don't, yeah, it's not, the presentation is not available online itself. And this is something, I mean, if you want to get into tracking, especially there's lots of really good local books, for Vermont or for the Northeast in general or whatever, that will have all of these in it. I mean, there's many different authors and more seem to come out every year because, I think tracking it's a good thing is becoming more popular. So it's very easy to find, kind of what the usual suspects are in your area. This is definitely not a, hard thing to come by.
Thanks. And Chuck, if you want a screenshot of the list or just a typed out one, just send me an email and we'll get that to you. So the next question is, what are the characteristics of marten tracks?
Yeah, so you did notice it is good call there. They are part of the weasel family for sure. And they tend to be more in the northern part of the Northeast, or at least high elevation. They're, kind of, I would say, similar size to at least the tracks are to, around a mink size, I would say. But what you're looking for, it always helps to know where you are too, right? So, if you're looking for marten tracks, you shouldn't be looking for them in the lowlands of like a hardwood forest, somewhere like in a kind of a warmer region of the Northeast. You really have to be kind of up in more of the spruce fir habitat is where they're much more at home. So you'd have to kind of start from there and then be looking for signs of share all those characteristics of what we saw basically with all the other weasels. They'll do that 2x2 track. They'll do the 3-4. They have 5 toes in front and rear with claws that often show, but they have maybe furrier feet, certainly than the mink do. So that's something to be aware of as well. And also, not quite as active all around brooks and streams as well. And mink aren't as active that high up either. So, if you're up and, above, at least, part of the Vermont that I'm in, you have to be above 2,000 feet minimum, I'd say, really to start to have a good chance of seeing marten tracks. And 25 to 3,500 feet or so is probably better for that even.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, when I used to work in Michigan last summer, we did marten surveys, but that was in the very northern tip of Michigan, so it was way up there.
Yeah, nice.
Cool experience. So the next question is, do lengths include tail?
For body lengths, it did. Yep. For what we saw in there. Yep. And that was for the weasels. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. The next question is, what do skunks eat during the winter and this time of year?
So yeah, skunk can be, very, they have a very varied diet. They do very well around people. So, they're very good at finding compost piles. They're good at finding your garbage. They do very well with people around. So if they can, they'd love to get into that kind of stuff and eat it. If they can't find that kind of thing, they can still kind of dig into rotting logs and find things that might be hiding in there for the winter as well. But they have they're not very good at like chasing down squirrels and things like that. They much more like to kind of find things that are either roadkill or trash and that kind of stuff, or kind of things that are much easier to kind of just to dig up that are taking shelter somewhere.
The next question is, what predators do the short and long-tailed weasels have to deal with?
Yeah, they are not a lot because they are so quick, and so they can hide very easily. There's not a lot of things that want to deal with the ferocity of weasels. There's kind of a famous kind kind of incident that one of the first tracking books that was written, but was by a man named Olaus Murray. And you can read his account of when he came across, I think it was ermine that was actually a hawk had swooped down and actually caught the ermine and was flying off with it. And as he was watching it, he saw like a commotion like happening up in the air. And then all of a sudden the weasel was dropped and came down to the ground, and the hawk was kind of flying erratically throughout and kind of was able to had to land somewhere in the distance. And he figured that the weasel had actually chewed a hole through the wing of the hawk as it was trying to fly away with it. So you know, they're incredibly tenacious and, you know, able to kind of fight off things. So there's not a lot of it. You know, probably that is maybe the number one thing that they might have to deal with are things like great horned owls and hawks, because, you know, kind of attack from above is a surprise attack and be a little bit easier for them to catch than things that are on the ground. I don't think there's a lot of ground-based predators that, you know, would actively go after weasel. It's, you know, it's all about food availability and, you know, how desperate animals are. You know, if they really need to find a meal, they'll try things that they might otherwise do. So, you know, fisher and mink and other things might actually go after them as well, and even, you know, bobcat and other animals. But it's not their. I'm sure they'd rather catch other things than try to have to, you know, deal with trying to catch a weasel.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Great question there. So the next, so far it's the last question of the workshop is, do skunks hibernate?
Yeah, that's one of the, there's kind of, as science is kind of learning more and more about animals and trying to, you know, kind of put them in categories or, you know, classify them. It's become more and more common to think of hibernation more as a spectrum rather than a, you know, a yes or a no, you know, whether or not an animal is hibernating or not hibernating. It's more useful to think of, you know, animals that do go into more kind of, another word for it, a state of torpor, which means, you know, much lower activity of body functions. And skunk, you know, if you want to put it kind of on a scale of like a woodchuck is a deep hibernator. You know, when they go under the ground for the winter, they are basically kind of comatose, you know, for months on end, as opposed to something like skunk, which can, during those dark, really cold spells that might go on for, you know, a long time in the dead of winter, they can go into kind of this inactivity state for several days on end or hours on end, depending on how long it is, and then come out of it very quickly and, you know, become active again. Whereas something like a woodchuck, it takes them, you know, several hours or so to kind of wake up out of their hibernation, because they're in such a deep state of hibernation. Whereas things like skunk and even a lot of our bird species have just nighttime torpor. Chickadees and other things will become very less active at night. Their heart rates will slow down extremely to much lower level, and just kind of, you know, weather the storm that way over a short time period. So skunk are kind of in that category of becoming less active during those cold spells, but I wouldn't call them a full hibernator, you know, on that kind of spectrum of hibernation. They're towards the lower end.
Thanks, Ed. Great question. I think I identify with a woodchuck on Monday mornings with regards to waking up.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Oh, actually, we just got one in real quick. What do skunks weigh?
Yeah, let me pull that back up there. I'll look on my screen off the top of my head. I can't remember. They're between 6 and 14 pounds. So again, those are the extremes. You know, 6 very low end and 14 very high end. So it's, you know, probably closer to like to the 9 to 11 pound, or, you know, for females again, and females being less and males being more. So, you know, they can be, you know, fairly good size, you know, the larger ones anyway.
Great. So thanks, Ed. Great presentation as always. So this workshop was recorded, like I said earlier, and you guys will get a link. You'll get an email with the link to the recording sent to the email that you used to register. Thank you all for attending today. We have 3 more workshops left in our virtual workshop series. Next week on March 23rd, we'll have a workshop on how you can create wildlife habitat in your backyard and even get certified as wildlife habitat through the National Wildlife Foundation. We will have our last installment of the wildlife tracking series on March 29th. Sad to see this series go. It's been such a great series. And then our last virtual workshop will be on April 8th, and that's going to be a workshop on how you can get started composting. And that'll conclude our virtual workshop series. Thank you all again for attending, and I hope to see you all at a future workshop. Have a great
Awesome.
week.
Thank you.